This is the podcast between an old school mentor and a digital mentee on managing and/or working with people, navigating a career, growing profits, and not killing your coworkers along the way. Now let's join the consultant, Hayden Shaw, and the millennial who fixes Hayden's iPhone, Seth Tower Hurd.
The Consultant and the Millennial podcast. So statistically, what is it, like 50 to 60% of the projects you start, whatever you do for a living, are either not going to get done or they're not going to get done on time. He's Hayden Shaw. He's helped over 30,000 managers, a bunch of companies you've heard of, a bunch of companies you haven't heard of, and has seen all the ups and downs and all the trends that didn't work in business. My name is Seth Tower Hurd. I run a company called Digital Profit Farm that helps companies make more money through websites, social media, and podcasting, just like this one. You can find out more about what I do at digitalprofitfarm.com. This is one of those things that doesn't get talked about necessarily in job interviews. I would say it doesn't necessarily get talked about when you're doing a year-end recap or a plan for the next quarter. And yet it's a thing that gets talked about when the fire is burning the office or the warehouse or wwhatever down because something's late and, oh my gosh, now what are we going to do? Yeah,
that's well said.
Yeah. We never plan for this and we always panic for this. So, I mean,
well, that's not true. There's a whole certification in Project Management Institute. The difference is we often don't apply it to smaller projects.
Okay.
We apply it to bigger projects. We're building, a whole new oil refinery. That's a classic example of where people are doing a 5-year project management map.
Here, let me say it differently. Non-project managers don't apply this real well traditionally.
That is a true statement. So a lot of companies, a lot of big corporations added the Office of Project Management, and those are some of the people that have the biggest twitch because they're like, we can't get anybody else to do it. And so it's interesting. Fortune magazine had a cover story back in the 90s, and it was called The End of the Job. And I think it was one of the most accurate calls into the future, because think about it, for a very small window of time, the factory created a job. A job meant that you could go home, and like my father-in-law did doing steel, you could go home and then somebody else would take over your job, and they may call you in the middle of the night with a question about something that went wrong and find out what you think, but you didn't think about it because it was their job now. And then somebody else came in on third shift and did the same work, and it was now their job. You went to work, you had a job, you came home. One of the things my wife and I was just talking to somebody about it this week at American Airlines. One of the things my wife and I fought about most was that her dad came home at the same time every day, unless there was a true overtime or an emergency. And they ate at 4:30. 4:30, he was home, he was hungry, they had dinner. And so when we first got married, she'd be like, sometimes you come home at 5, sometimes you come home at 7. I never know what to expect. And she finally had to talk to some other people before she really realized that was kind of how the new world worked, because she grew up in a household that had a job, and I grew up in a household with 2 college professors who didn't have a job. And so when Fortune magazine said it was the end of the job, what they were basically saying is we all work in projects now.
And yet, I mean, I have 2 master's degrees. And
overachiever.
They were free. Whatever. I get so much business now because I have a master's in political theory. Let me tell you, once people know I have a master's in political theory, they just throw money at me and say, build me a website. You understand, ancient Roman military tactics. Here, just all the money. Here it is. Just we're dumping buckets of money on you.
I'm sensing a bit of sarcasm. So good.
Oh, no, I don't regret it. I'm just saying it. Maybe it was free. It wasn't the most practical thing in the world. So I don't know how much of an overachiever I am. It's not like I have a JD and an MBA.
Well, it just means that you can't. Even when you're doing daily, videos, you can't help but talk about politics, and it does tick some people off. From time to time. You
know what? I'm such a networker. Sometimes I have to trim that number down a little bit, and I don't regret that. So again, I've been to a lot of business conferences. I have seen a lot of really high-profile people speak in person, as you do, kind of in the corporate life, right? You get to go see this, cool person who ran Ritz-Carlton or whatever. I've read a lot of business books, and outside of actively taking my team a couple times to project management type of course, which a lot of times honestly was taught by like a fifth rate kind of consultant who more or less just read from a textbook, which was still pretty helpful. This just doesn't get a lot of attention. And I would say that as far as the people I've worked for, it's probably also maybe the biggest weakness that I've experienced in the bosses I've had throughout the years.
Hey, here's a shout out then. I've worked for Frank and Covey for decades, and they created a course called Project Management for the non-project manager for just this niche. What are the basic project management stuff that you do with a project manager? When we all have no projects, and what are the basic tools that make you better? So I agree with you completely. A lot of us can get a lot better at projects, even if it's not what we do full time.
Okay. So I think I actually am a lot better than where I have been in the past. I still definitely struggle with it. I'd say I still have clients who struggle with it. So it's always a unique conversation, unique situation where I have a client that's kind of weak in the same area I'm weak, and we got to figure out how we can both be better at what we're bad at. But wherever you're at, family business, corporate, nonprofit, whatever, like you already know, like the place you went when this topic came up, the thing that didn't work, the person that frustrates you, the little bit of shame you have over something that never launched, the dustbin of things you got 12% of the way through as a company and never finished. Okay, let's get into it. How do we do it?
Yeah, why, the topic that you said, let's talk about is why do projects fail? And I think they fail I think the biggest reason they fail is because they weren't a good idea.
That's very legit.
Yeah, they weren't a good idea. We promised people that we would talk, and you asked me a question to wrap up the last episode on how do you know when to make decisions. What do you do if there's a bad project and your boss is really hot on it? Well, we starve the project. Human beings are like, that's a stupid project, so I will give it a check mark. And we all know the difference between when we're really committed to something and when it's a requirement. If you're an entrepreneur, this applies less to you, but anybody who's worked in a corporation knows that there are things you got to get a check mark for. You have to go watch the video about Europe's new laws about email. You got to watch it, 10-minute video, you got to pass the test. You have to get a check mark. You don't have to be great at it. You just have to get a check mark that said you did it. I have to go get my wellness checkup. It is a check mark. Now, in a family-owned business, for example, if you're an entrepreneur, it may be something that your partner wants to do, your business partner, maybe something that your life partner goes, well, honey, this is, and so you're getting a check mark. It's not something you care about. You're getting a check mark. There's all kinds of in-law jokes that could come in right now, but I got to go to the in-laws. I have to show up. I have to get a check mark. I don't have to be nice. And so point of it is there are things we do to get a check mark, and we do that. The boss says, hey, everybody needs to get this turned in. So we do it. We get a check mark, but we starve the project of oxygen because we don't think it's any good or we don't want to do it.
So is that, I'm not sure if that's the right or the wrong thing.
It's right or wrong. It's how we cope with too much to do. Second thing that goes wrong is one of the reasons we starve it. Great question, Seth. Is it right or wrong? Peter Drucker, the father of modern management, in his book Innovation, which I just thought of again a couple of months ago, because if you love books and you're not on BookBub, then you're missing great deals. And Peter Drucker's book on innovation was like $2.99 as a promotion. And BookBub lets you pick categories, and then it sends you every day to the top 10 books that you've selected that are on sale on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, ebooks. So it got me thinking of it. I already had it, so I didn't buy it. But Peter Drucker said it this way. So a little shout out to BookBub, because I love you and my wife hates you because I bought like 200 books last year.
I'm actually signing up right now. It
is great.
It's so easy to go broke $3 at a time too.
Well, they're usually 99 cents or $1 or $2, and so anyway, the tape I had when I added all the books I and my son bought on the same account. I had to fold the tape 6 times. I was like, oh, I didn't spend a lot, but I did get a lot. No wonder she's already irritated. Anyway, BookBub is great, but it is addictive if you're a book person. Peter Drucker said this. Innovation doesn't work because we don't slough off the past, we add on top. His words was slough off. He said, you can't innovate if you're doing it as a side job. So in other words, a lot of projects fail because people who are already working 60 hours a week get a new project, and the only way to cope is to make it fight with everything else, almost in a fight club or Darwinian natural selection way. And a lot of projects just don't get enough political clout behind them that we focus on them. They may have been the idea that would transform the company, the brand new product, the breakthrough thing, but we don't slough off enough of what we're already doing to provide enough time, energy, and resources to it. And politically speaking, it just never passes muster.
You just cost me $20. I signed up while you were talking. So whatever just happened there,
so
I'll have
sorry.
to listen to it. I'll be surprised like everyone else who's listening to this episode because I don't know what you just said there.
That's okay. And then the third thing is, one, just to go back to what we talked about, people, half the projects are bad ideas. And they may be a great idea, but they're a bad idea because the company, the politics of the company isn't willing to put the resources to it. And so it's a bad idea. It's a bad project. It never should have been done. Yes, it would be the thing that saved the company or turned things around, but it's a bad project because the company will never do it. And true entrepreneurs suggest bad projects.
Let me say a couple things there. One of the things I've been doing is, you've mentioned that, you and I are both religious people. So I try to sit down with the Bible every morning and then sit down with the journal. And I have a little bit of just getting stuff out of my head, prayer, and then I also try to write down 3 or 4 goals and try to stick to those things, which right now is quarterly sales by July 1st. And there's some, there's some kind of mile push-ups, sit-ups, kettlebell swings I want to be able to do this quarter, and then I'm trying to get a certain amount of sleep, and I got a couple other little things that I want to get in there, right? Well, even doing that every morning, I can do that by the morning, and then by midday, I want to start another business, and then the next morning I do that, and the next day I still want to start another business because the thing is I'm right. And I don't have I'm right about things I don't have the resources for. So, somebody can steal this. Eventually,
Boom.
Yes. That's
perfectly said. Drop the mic.
Okay. So, if you're right about things you don't have the resources for, it's dead. You're doomed.
I was just listening to an interview with Marshall Goldsmith, a great guy, brilliant guy. He said the thing he learned from Peter Drucker was if whoever makes the decision makes the decision. In other words, it may not be the right person making the decision. The best person for the decision often doesn't make the decision, but the person who has that decision-making authority will make the decision. Let it go, Frozen. Get over it, is Peter Drucker's advice. Yes, some people who aren't the best at making the decision will often make the decision. Let it go. If you don't have the power to do something, then let it go. But, you ready? People who think they're right, and often are, can't let it go because they believe right is what should happen instead of what can happen, and so they push projects that don't have a hope of making it in this organization and then get frustrated with the organization. They're entrepreneurs, not intrapreneurs, to go back to a conversation from our last podcast. Entrepreneurs have to have control because it's the right idea. Mark Cuban, right? Gary Vaynerchuk, it's the right idea. I got to have control even if I got to work 80 hours a week and take 5 days off in my 20s. Whereas entrepreneurs are like, who are the players? What game are we playing? What play should we run to move change through the current system? And entrepreneurs are too right to do that.
Oh, okay. So one of the things
and by the way, in your last job, we never talked about it in these terms. In your last job, you were an entrepreneur who kept suggesting marketing ideas that the organization simply wasn't going to be able to do because of how many jumps or leaps it would take for them to go from their current practices to the things you were saying they should do. And it was too many leaps. They couldn't slough off the past. They had other things they were doing with their time, and they couldn't let some of those go in order to do a weekly podcast. Yeah. And they were used to controlling messaging, and so they couldn't do that in the world of social media. And so they limited the amount of social media they did because they were used to controlling print messaging. And so you were suggesting things that emotionally would have required great rinse in their emotional psyche and the way of the institution. And it would have been too big of a jump. And therefore, it wasn't a play that the players on the field could run.
Yes. I would say, too, that one of the things that is frustrating about a larger organization that you can probably relate to, and maybe you just have to come to peace with.
You keep talking, I got low blood sugar. You keep going.
Maybe you have to come to peace with, I don't know, is the fact that I always thought, well, this is going to increase sales, so I'm right. People will get out of my way. And a lot of times, large organizations fight against things that will increase sales, where I would say that actually is a pretty good characteristic of family businesses. They're more likely to, or small business, they're more likely to pivot and go after something that's going to increase sales. As to where you add more layers of, risk-averse people, you can sit there and watch, money and customers slip away, and you can be the person that knows that you could be helping them get to another level, and they really don't want to go there, or they don't want to go there enough to take the risk.
And that's when an organization is beginning to get what has been called rigor mortis. It is so tied to past deals, agreements, and processes that when it's time to pivot, they can't pivot. And they often wait so long to see that what they're doing isn't working. And it usually works, but people underneath are seeing the business model cave in, whether it's a for-profit or non-for-profit. And suddenly there is enough of an obvious collapse in the market. So everybody who's inside will go, this year we were able to figure it out, but this isn't good. We can't sustain this. And then all of a sudden they have the comeuppance. They have the year they pay the piper. They have the year when sales go down 20%, or giving goes down 20% if you're a nonprofit organization. And suddenly people are like, oh no, we're in trouble. The people can see it on the inside, but they can't get the projects through and get enough of what we've done sloughed off because the organization is still putting so much extra energy in pumping what we did up enough to hit our numbers that instead of sloughing off the past, they are stealing from the future to keep the past working because they don't know what else to do yet. They often see the problem, but they don't know what else to do. So they're so desperate to hit numbers this year that they rob resources. They don't slough off the past. They don't slough off the past. They rob the future to pump up the past until it's an obvious crash and it's obvious to everybody we desperately have to do something else. That is a typical life cycle of organizations that have hit rigor mortis, realizing they got to do something differently. It's the 50-year-old guy with the heart attack going, oh, really? I can't pound down ribs and chips and beer and watch football. I got to do something else differently. Duh, your wife and daughter told you that 7 years ago. But now that you've had a heart attack, you see it.
Let me just throw in here when it comes to why projects fail and what road you should and shouldn't go down, right? I would say that I have yet to see a situation in business where there's not advanced warning. You got all these cab drivers that are complaining about their medallion not being worth anything in New York City anymore because nobody wants to use cabs because they're dirty and people are rude. And, those cab drivers that own the medallions had years of seeing Uber get started in just San Francisco and then Uber coming to Chicago and then fighting Uber. And they could have gotten out or changed the whole time. Blockbuster saw Redbox and Netflix happen, and they stared at it until they were in desperate situations to do the same thing. The other one, Borders. My gosh, Borders waited until the very end to get their own e-reader, which is a big part of what saved Barnes & Noble. They stared at Barnes & Noble and Amazon and just stared at them until they died. And I don't know. That's why I think it's great to jump in and out of different kinds of careers because, this will burn maybe a minor bridge or two, but whatever. The music industry. I told the music industry, because I was working in radio, I told record labels that, man, I'm seeing a lot of 20-year-olds that really care about vinyl, that these bands are pressing themselves, and this is going to be a thing. And they're like, you're an idiot. And, you know, they were still convinced that CDs were never going to go away. This is 2007. Now CDs are basically gone, and vinyl is like 25 to 30% of all physical sales, which is crazy, right? It might be 25 to 30% of sales because there's so much streaming. We don't buy music anymore, right? And so if you've been in a big organization that's been there a long time, I think your default is to say, no, we've always been here. We've been here 50 years. It's not really going to hurt us. It's a trend. Let's just keep doing the same projects the same way. And we'll just keep, even though a lot of our people on the inside are going, this is a bad idea, we shouldn't be doing this, we're still doing it. Well,
three thoughts. Number one, you got to right place. Here's what I've coached my sons. So let's tie to the topic. Let's tie to what you just said, and then let's tie in a generational theme. Because one of the things that millennials get hammered for is wanting to change everything so quickly. So my oldest son got hired by an organization to bring change, but when he tries to, they tell him no. That's exactly what happens. I said, well, good. They're good. You are in a good spot. You're a change agent. Think in 5-year terms. Be an intrapreneur, not an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs can move in pivot terms. You're going to have to move in leadership terms. Then my other advice was quit designing plays for players who aren't on your team.
Okay.
It's like fantasy football going, oh, I wish I had their roster. Well, yes, if you had their roster, you could run those plays. But so many people design projects or plays for players who they don't have on the field. Who are the players? What can they do well? And you look at the very best coaches in sports, and they will be coaches who can take a team of players. Now, there's some coaches that are great with a particular combination. And there's certain, some people argue that Bill Belichick is that guy. He can do great with a really brilliant quarterback, and he doesn't do so well with other configurations of players, football fans. But, there are some players, sorry, I'm a Cardinals fan, I know has said this, Tommy Lasorda, he could just come along, and no matter what he had on the team, he could build a winning team out of whoever the players were, because he could make it work.
He might have meant Tony La Russa there, by the way.
All right, can you tell I have jet lag? Thank you. I knew as it came out of my mouth, I'm like, this was not right, but I got too much jet lag to know what it was. All right, say, Tommy, I'm sorry. I love you, man. And then matter of fact, we just edit this whole thing out because there's going to be some serious Cardinal hate. Anyway, you get the point. The man could take whatever team. Would you please not, please, I'm begging of you, do not suggest things that the people on your team can't do. It will make you look brilliant, and it will make you look like a guy I coached once. They called him the angry young man. He's brilliant, but he makes everybody mad. Then he left the company and started 7 businesses and became a multimillionaire. He was an entrepreneur, not an intrapreneur. If you can't write plays for the people who exist on your team, then you're an entrepreneur, and you got to figure out what else you're going to do, because you're not wired for internal life.
Yeah, that's what's funny is now that I've been out on my own for about a year, and I have no plans on ever going back, despite a couple weeks ago, and I told you I was going to quit. Even though it was going well and I was just too tired. I'm like,
listen to the last podcast, yes. And we go into much more depth on Seth's decision to quit when he'd had 4 hours sleep for too many weeks in a row.
The odd thing is I feel like I'm much more ready now for corporate style management than I've ever been. Now that I've had to be out on my own, and I've just had some more time to have life experiences, and I don't want to be there. Now that I'm not there, I would say that one of the things that I always overestimated, I overestimate my own ability to get a certain amount of tasks done in a week. I wildly overestimate it. Week to week, I don't know if I'll ever all the way get to where I need to be on that. I'm always way too optimistic. The other thing is, honestly, I would say every management job I've been in, going back to when I was 24, 25, just managing a couple little part-timers doing events and radio, I overestimate that other people have the work ethic that I do, and will do whatever it is, and even want to grow in their jobs, honestly. Like, I always assume that people want to grow in their jobs and be great, and probably half to three quarters of people I've ever managed want to have a job and want to do pretty good at what they're already doing. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I always have these grand schemes.
This is where you're not actually, you're kind of a bad millennial to be on the consultant and the millennial. Because, the biggest way, I was just explained it this way this week. For traditionalists and boomers, who you are most influenced by, work ethic wise, work is the steak. Sorry, vegans. Work is the steak, and everything else is the dessert or the entree, or the vegetable. But for Xers and millennials, and this newest generation, it'll be interesting to see where they come out on work ethics. There's not enough new information on the connectors to know how they're going to roll yet. But it looks like they will follow in suit from the Xers and the millennials. Work is a waffle. There are 4 squares on that waffle, and get your work syrup off of my other 3 squares. You're encroaching, boss. And so for you, who have always seen work as the steak and everything else as a side dish, people who look at work as a waffle are like, I don't get it. Just do what you got to do. And so for you, non-water walkers, to use Rosabeth Moss Cantor's description, non-water walkers can be frustrating because you've always been a water walker.
That makes sense. That very legitimately makes sense. The good news is
as a result, water walkers can't write plays for mortals. They can only write plays for the Avengers.
Okay. Well, and let me put it this way too. The idea that I'm ever going to hire a bunch of people like me as the company grows is ridiculous, because if they're like me, they're gone. They're going to do a couple years. They're going to learn some stuff. I told you that about, and I mean, I'll just say it. I don't know if, if he would care or not, but Donald Miller, who was one of the most successful people in marketing previous to that, had been one of the most successful nonfiction authors, I would say, of the last 15 years. He and I got into an email conversation about me working for his company. And I said to you, this guy is one of my heroes. I read a passage of this guy's book at my grandfather's funeral. He has shaped my thinking in the way that very few people on this earth have. And I said to you, yeah, I'm going to do it for 2 years to, get the name brand recognition, and then I'm out. So it's a good thing he didn't hire me, because I would have bounced out on him after 18 to 24 months. And I really
I don't think you would have.
You don't think I would have?
I don't think you would have, because you would have moved to Nashville. You would have had a kid. You would have loved the culture. And I think you would have done it for 5 or 6 years. I honestly do think you would have done it for 5 or 6 years. But if I thought you really would have done it for 2 years, I would have told you not to talk to him.
Okay, that's fair. Well, I knew I wasn't there forever. I know some of his people in his company.
That's right.
And I think that those are kind of forever employees. And I knew I was not a forever employee in the way that I've talked to some of his other employees, and they love him to death. They love the company. That's all they ever want to do. I've got a guy that I know that said, he got on and started the endurance sports division of World Vision, one of the biggest charities in the world. He said, this is my last job. And he was probably 32, 33 years old. This is my last job. I'm going to work for World Vision for the rest of my life. I just can't think. I don't think like that. Anything outside of,
I know, and I do. I say I'm with Franklin Covey part-time. I'm actually a full-time employee, but 10 years ago, when they needed generational content, suggested I work on my own to make enough to make it worthwhile. So the only reason I do things on my own is because they came up with the idea. And I always figured I would retire with Franklin Covey if they were still in business. And the only reason I'm doing anything else is because they suggested it. So I'm just the opposite. I 26 years. 26 years I've worked for the company Stephen Covey started.
Okay. Well,
now it changes about every 3 years. The job reinvents itself.
Yeah.
Or I whip the board out of my head.
Yes.
And frankly, that's what people tell me. Yeah, I've been there 20 years, but I've done 7 jobs.
Yeah. Well, anyway, as far as managing projects, if we can, kind of pull all this back together, I can't think I'm going to find a bunch of people like me, and that's how things are going to go faster and better, because I will never keep people like me. And even
well said. That is a great expectation. There's a great article in Harvard Business Review from about 10 years ago called "In Praise of B Players." Because for about 3 years, the idea was you only want A players. How do you hire A players? How do you screen for A players? You know, your team needs some A players or you will not get into the playoffs. And if you have all A players, it'll be like a supergroup team or a supergroup rock and roll band. They will fight all the time, and then they will take each other's girlfriends and they will hate each other like the Eagles or like
Fleetwood Mac
Guns N' Roses.
Oh, is that what broke up Guns N' Roses? I'm a millennial. I actually was. I was like 6.
You really can't talk about the girlfriend who was cheated on because anyway, it's fairly lewd. The girlfriend who somebody taking somebody else's girlfriend, you really can't talk about it. It's a fairly lewd story.
Okay. I'm an elder millennial, and so the older siblings of my friends were, the real Guns N' Roses fans. I was still watching cartoons.
And I was not. I thought Axl Rose just needed to be spanked, but by his grandmother. He was a bad boy, and he needed to be spanked. So that tells you how much I appreciated them in their destruction. But they were wildly popular. So Xers, I know you loved him. I know they were a super group, and super groups just fought a lot, typically. And so I remember my mentor saying to me, Hayden, think about this. I was working with the bank, and a woman said, I'll tell you why we're having trouble in this branch. We've got all bricks and we have no mortar. I need to find a mortar teller who is relational and holds everybody together. We've got too many superstars in this branch, and they all fight too hard to be the best. And I need somebody who doesn't care about competing. They care about relationships more than competition. And A players tend to care about competing and being the best. And in praise of B players, those are the ones that hold the whole thing together long term. All right. Project management. Why don't they work? They often don't work because it's a dumb project. It's never going to survive. Half of all projects I've seen didn't have a hope when they began. One of the biggest reasons they don't have a hope, and the big message of this episode is design plays for the players on the field. Don't design plays because you're right. You were right about the music business, but the music business couldn't have made that jump. There was no way they were going to give up the revenue from CDs and focus on vinyl. There was no way they're going to do it. Actually, digital killed the radio star, not video, and so they got in real trouble with digital, and then vinyl became the cool alternative to digital because digital doesn't have the sound. And all the people who said, "Well, CD sounds better than digital," it does, but it doesn't sound as warm as vinyl, and so it's not going to go back from CD to digital. Both of them sound too cold. It's going to go from digital to vinyl because once you hear vinyl, you're like, oh, good night. My uncle was right. It's never been the same since vinyl.
Yeah.
And so but there's no way the industry was going to see that. It was too big of a jump. So are you an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur? If you can't write plays for the people on the team, you're an entrepreneur, not an intrapreneur. And then lastly, why do projects fail? They fail because people don't have good project management chops. And so project management chops, most people who are good at time management personally try to manage projects like you manage your own personal to-do list, and they can't pull it off. You're managing people through projects. You're managing politics through projects. You're gathering and negotiating resources and sign-offs through projects. You're not managing a to-do list. That's the biggest mistake I see people make is they're really good at managing their own stuff, and then they just crash and burn because projects are about politics and people as much as they are managing your to-do list. And if you manage it like you manage your own stuff, you're in trouble.
He's Hayden Shaw. You can check out peopledrivenresults.com if you know you've got some management stuff going on in your organization. Grab his free videos, peopledrivenresults.com. My name is Seth Tower Hurd, and you can find out what I do at digitalprofitfarm.com. You got a website that's not making money, you don't know what to do with social media, or you would love to reach thousands of people every single week. Oh, what's that?
Call him.
Call in? Call me.
Call Seth. That happens.
Yes. Digitalprofitfarm.com. You can find out more there. The Facebook and the Millennial Consultant Group. You can check that out. And finally, we're going to have some kind of live meetup in the next couple months in the Southwest Burbs. Do a live episode, do some Q&A, and you can meet some other people that may just change your professional life. All right, that's it for this week. We'll see you then.